Just like I made a video about Halloween in the 1920s, I'll do the same for Christmas. It won't be a deep dive, but I did a lot of looking around, and I think you'll find it interesting. Christmas wasn't as different as Halloween was back then, but it certainly had some distinct differences that I want to talk about. So let's take a look. Of course, Christmas had been around for centuries, and even Christmas trees could be found, at least in wealthy families, by the mid-19th century in the United Kingdom, where it became a national holiday in 1834, and the custom spread to the US shortly after. Christmas cards began to appear later that same century in America, and Christmas was made a national holiday in the United States in 1870. One thing especially influenced the culture of Christmas, at least sort of. Like most things in the 1920s, Christmas too was affected by World War I. Not exactly in an obvious and direct way, but more psychological. The horrors of war made people long for innocence again, and the joy of Christmas did just that. In the US, while the horrors of war had been felt somewhat emotionally on a national level, the country remained completely unaffected by the war physically. This combination provided, well, the entire backdrop for the relative prosperity of the 1920s in America. And this meant that Christmas, like most other things, became more commercialized, though certainly not to the extent that it is today. We can see this through a new wave of advertising from companies that wanted to capitalize on everybody's good cheer. This was especially true of new technologies such as radios, which quickly became a popular Christmas gift. Other popular gifts included model train sets, Kodak cameras, winter clothes and accessories, ice skates, and pedal cars and dolls for children. For stocking stuffers, you might receive chocolates or other sweets, fruit, nuts, candy canes, or small toys. And the stockings weren't the big decorative ones we're used to now. Instead, people would simply use their actual socks or stockings. Okay, now let's take a look at some Christmas decorations. First, the tree, a necessary item for Christmas celebration. Christmas trees in the 1920s were, well, fat. By that, I mean they were very wide and short. So, while slimness was fashionable in the 1920s for many things, it was entirely the opposite for Christmas trees. This was also the time when a more economical and convenient option really caught on: artificial trees. A popular type of artificial tree consisted of green-dyed goose feathers attached to wire branches. However, real trees were still quite commonly used as well. And this was a time when you could just go out and cut one down from a nearby forest if you lived in the right sort of area. Wealthier people could cut one down on their own extensive property. People in the cities could buy ones that were brought in from beyond city limits by wagon. Now about the tree decorations. The most modern addition at this time was electric lights. These look similar to the lights that continued to be used in the following few decades, though they were more delicate and probably more of a fire hazard. But they were certainly not as big of a fire hazard as what other people still used: candles. Since electric Christmas lights were so new, some people just didn't move on with the times. And because they were also expensive, others didn't have enough money or they just didn't want to spend it on those. So they opted for real candles instead, which they put on the tree. But you'll be less horrified to know that these people generally put up their Christmas tree on Christmas Eve and dismantled it within a day after Christmas, and didn't leave the open flames unattended if they could help it. Some people opted for no lights at all. The 1920s was also the first time that glass ornaments were widely produced, something that, like many Christmas-related traditions, was spearheaded by German immigrants in America. Other common decorations were long strings of popcorn and paper cutouts, often in the shape of snowflakes. Speaking of Christmas trees, President Calvin Coolidge was the first president to have a national Christmas tree. For the Christmas of 1923, he lit the candles of the enormous 60-foot tree in a big ceremony. It has been an American tradition ever since. One of the most interesting aspects of Christmas in the 1920s was that it was heavily associated with England. This is something that has almost completely gone away in our time, but Christmas back then was Dickensian. If you don't know what that means, it means it's related to the famous British author Charles Dickens. His famous tale, A Christmas Carol, permeated all things Christmas back then. It's hard to explain because it's more of a feeling, but think of it like this. Many of us now feel an unexplainable kind of nostalgia when we listen to Christmas music from the 1950s and early 1960s, which many consider to be the golden age of Christmas in America. That's probably the closest way I can explain it. This Dickens-style Victorian Christmas had a very comforting nostalgia of simpler times. Of course, this differs from the 1950s-1960s comparison in that Christmas was never like that in America. Not only was Christmas rarely celebrated in America in the time of Dickens, and was most definitely not mainstream, it was using the nostalgia of an entirely different country. In rare instances, this influence can still be seen in America. Near my hometown in Texas, there's a city called Galveston, which is right on the Gulf Coast. Every year, there's an event called Dickens on the Strand that's held around Christmas time. The whole thing is styled in the Dickens Victorian sort of aesthetic. I never understood this throwback of an American nostalgia trend until I looked into it for this video. But anyways, this false but innocent atmosphere of nostalgia was the norm for a 1920s Christmas in America. This is reflected in illustrations and cards relating to Christmas, as well as Christmas foods like fruitcake and various English puddings such as plum and Yorkshire that were commonly made at this time. A Christmas dinner, on the other hand, probably consisted of a large poultry dish. Turkey, roast goose, hen, and duck were all common. To wrap things up, I found an excerpt that I'd like to share of one woman from Georgia recalling her Christmas experience from the 1920s. Songs and skits were performed by students in the upper grades. The tree stood sturdily, secured to a large wooden box on the spacious stage, which was elevated about 3 feet from the floor. The heavy branched cedar, reaching the ceiling, drooped with unwrapped gifts, such as small dolls, pencil sets, peppermint candy sticks, apples, and oranges. Varicolored silk handkerchiefs waved like fresh blooming flowers above the scalloped strings of popcorn and crepe paper streamers. My teacher and the school principal had provided a fat, jolly Santa Claus, outfitted in the typical red woolen suit, banded with soft white fur trim. His laughter rang out richly and deeply as he handed out the gifts from the tree branches. While some things have changed naturally due to technological development, some things have stayed the same since the 1920s. The image of a jolly red and white Santa with a long white beard was pretty much the same as it is now, and children could even meet him at department stores and get their picture taken with him. School plays at Christmas time were commonplace. Snowball fights lasted throughout winter. Christmas carols were sung around the neighborhood, and that feeling of excitement children get on Christmas morning cheered up the household. Things like these will probably never change. And so, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to all you sheiks and gals out there. I hope you all stay safe during this holiday season. That's all for now, but stay tuned to hear more tales from the Jazz Age.